Everyone swore she was alone. The photo said otherwise. Welcome to Hercule Puzzles. I am your host, Craden. Type your city in the comments. I want to know who's watching. You all make this so much more than a story. Let's begin. It began in an otherwise unremarkable Mayfair drawing room, where Lady Eugenia Farnler, matriarch of one of London's most esteemed families, hosted an intimate gathering of titled acquaintances and close relations. The soft light of afternoon filtered through gold-trimmed curtains, and the low hum of cultured conversation filled the air. On the surface, it was yet another quiet Wednesday tea display of refinement, not excitement. But at precisely 4:37 p.m., the fragile calm shattered. It started with a gasp, followed by the brittle clink of fine porcelain against the marble floor. Lady Eugenia's niece, Miss Clara Farnler, had opened the sealed envelope delivered moments earlier by a local courier. The photograph it contained fluttered to the floor as if fleeing its own contents. Several guests craned their necks curiously, but when Lady Eugenia picked it up, her complexion drained to the color of bone. The photo, old, faded, and unmistakably real, showed her late husband, Lord Peter Farnler, embracing a woman whose face had supposedly never been seen by living relatives, a woman long presumed dead, a woman whose presence in that frame was not only shocking but impossible. Lord Farnler had perished in a sailing accident 23 years ago, his name honored with quiet reverence in military and aristocratic circles alike. His affair with the American actress Lily Caro had been a brief scandal before the war, ending in Lily's supposed disappearance and an eventual courtly reconciliation with Eugenia. The story had faded into whispers. Lily Caro had never been seen again, and no photographs were ever known to exist. And yet here it was, Lily and Peter, smiling as if they had just stepped out of time itself. By 6 p.m., the police had been summoned. A quiet Inspector Drew from Scotland Yard took the photograph into evidence, noting Lady Eugenia's shaken demeanor and Clara's insistence that the envelope bore no return address. The postmark read only Marseille. What could this mean? The case might have been dismissed as an unpleasant hoax, an ill-timed attempt at blackmail, or mischief until the following morning, when a second envelope arrived. This time it was not addressed to the house, but rather slipped beneath the door of Lady Eugenia's study in the dead of night. No stamp, no seal, no human explanation. Inside, another photograph. This one was more disturbing. It showed Lord Farnler, again years older than he had ever lived to be, seated in what looked like a hospital room. The timestamp on the corner read April 18, 1948, a date 10 years after his confirmed death. And standing next to him, unmistakably, was Lady Eugenia herself. Except Lady Eugenia insisted she had never seen that room before. She denied ever sitting beside that man at that time. And yet the photograph captured her with perfect, disquieting clarity. Words spread quickly. The whispers began. Witchcraft, forgery, madness. Family skeletons yawned in their graves. Lady Eugenia locked herself. In her room, Clara accused the household staff. The staff accused Clara, even Inspector Drew, ever the rational man. looked at the second photograph and blinked twice, as if doubting his own vision. 3 days later, the family's long-time solicitor, Mr. Gerald Teversham, was found dead in his flat, a neat hole in his temple, his service revolver beside him. Suicide, said the police. Overwork, stress. But in his briefcase still locked lay a third photograph. This one of him standing outside the Farnler estate, dated the day before. The timestamp read 10:03 a.m., but the housekeeper swore he had never arrived. It was then amid confusion, secrets, and the ripples of quiet panic that Miss Clara Farnler took a decisive step. She booked an appointment with Hercule Poirot. The detective received her in his flat in Whitehaven Mansions, impeccably dressed as ever. Not a speck of dust, not a painting out of alignment. Clara described the events with composure that only just masked her dread. She presented the 3 photographs now sealed in protective sleeves, and watched carefully as Poirot examined each with delicate precision, holding them at arm's length, then closer, then beneath the precise glow of his reading lamp. He said nothing for a long while, and then he uttered, almost casually, "Mademoiselle, you are quite correct. These photographs should not exist." Clara swallowed hard. "But they do." Poirot nodded once. "And because they do, someone is playing a game. A most dangerous one. Let us be clear, these are not random hoaxes. These are messages, threats, perhaps, warnings, or something much cleverer." She shifted uncomfortably. "But why now? Why after all this time?" "Ah," Poirot said, straightening up, "that is precisely the question we must answer. Someone wants the past reopened, which means someone fears the truth being buried. But I assure you, mademoiselle, Hercule Poirot does not bury the truth. He exhumes it. And with that, he made arrangements to visit Farnler Manor immediately, not as a guest, not as an inspector, but as a gardener of secrets, ready to trim the tangled vines of memory, illusion, and deception until only the root remained. Hercule Poirot arrived at Farnler Manor under the grey veil of an overcast morning, where the clouds hung low over the Sussex hills, and the air clung damp and watchful. The estate itself was impressive red brick, old ivy, wrought iron gates, but Poirot's first thought upon crossing the threshold was that something here was to quiet, not the tranquility of peace, but the silence of people listening behind doors. He was greeted by the housekeeper, Mrs. Harbottle, a rigid woman in her early 60s, with thin lips and a spine too straight for comfort. She informed him that Lady Eugenia was in her morning room and had not left it. Since the solicitor's death, Poirot gave a nod, asked to be shown to his room first, and then requested a list of all household members, permanent and visiting. The housekeeper, though prim, complied. By midday, Poirot had acquainted himself with the key individuals staying or employed at the manor. Each, he noted, had a tie to Lord Farnley's memory, and more curiously, to the present turmoil. Lady Eugenia Farnler, naturally, was the central figure. Once a celebrated beauty in her youth, she was now frail, dignified, and burdened with decades of restraint. Her position was one of power, but also of isolation. She had no children, Clara was the only heir to the Farnler name. Miss Clara Farnler. The niece was 27, intelligent, unwed, and had grown up partially in this house. Her mother, Eugenia's sister, had died young, and Clara had long acted as companion and social aid to her aunt. Poirot took a particular interest in her resolve. She appeared forthright, but he wondered, was it duty, or was it guilt? Mr. Edward Bexley, the estate manager, had served under Lord Farnler since before the war. A man in his 50s with a fondness for cigarettes and accounts ledgers. He handled finances and land maintenance. His tone was one of forced patience, and he kept glancing at the windows as if anticipating bad news. Poirot made a note of his discomfort. Mrs. Adelaide Northgate, a cousin through marriage, had arrived the previous week for the roses, as she put it. A stylish widow with a sharp tongue. She had a way of smiling when others were distressed and pressing her luck in conversations where she wasn't invited. Poirot found her watching him from the hallway, arms folded, eyes curious. He returned her gaze with the briefest of bows. Oliver Northgate, Adelaide's grown son, was 35, idle, entitled, and technically unemployed. He had tried his hand at the theatre in his 20s and failed, dabbling now in vague photographic ventures. The irony of that was not lost on Poirot. Oliver claimed to have a darkroom in London and spoke vaguely of artistic exposure. He also drank too much and smiled too widely. Dr. Marston Hill, the family physician, had been Lord Farnley's doctor and continued to visit the estate monthly. He was not currently in residence, but had been seen in the village only a day before the solicitor's death. Poirot sent word requesting his presence. Mrs. Harbottle, the housekeeper, remained stoic. She had served for nearly 20 years, loyal, precise, and unimaginative. Yet even she admitted reluctantly that someone had entered the study during the night when the second photograph was delivered. She could not say who. No one, she whispered. No footsteps, no disturbance. And yet the photograph was there. Poirot spent the afternoon meeting each of these individuals privately, asking gentle questions, watching their faces. He posed only basic inquiries at first. Had they seen the photographs? Did they know of Lily Caro? Where had they been on the night the second envelope arrived? He received answers that were tidy, rehearsed. No, they had never heard of a second woman in Lord Farnley's life. No, they had no knowledge of photography or Marseille. No, they had nothing to gain from discrediting Lady Eugenia. To perfect, Poirot thought. Dinner was formal and restrained. The table long, the silences longer. Poirot observed the seating. Clara beside Lady Eugenia, Oliver across from Adelaide, who ignored him. Mr. Bexley sat nearest the decanter and poured liberally. The atmosphere was cool but laced with tension like actors in the same play, each hoping someone else would break first. At one point, Lady Eugenia dropped her fork. Clara reached to pick it up, but Adelaide beat her to it and said, too loudly, "You mustn't. Worry so, Eugenia. You'll frighten yourself into an early grave." Poirot watched Eugenia's fingers tremble slightly as she resumed her meal. After dinner, he excused himself and walked the corridors of the manor alone. The house was large but symmetrical, too symmetrical, a place where a photograph could be, slipped under a door and no one might hear it, where shadows were still honored, and secrets filed neatly like family ledgers. He stopped outside the study, the very room where the second photograph had appeared. The fire was out, the door was locked, but Poirot stooped and examined the floor. The carpet was thick, recently cleaned. Yet he found a single long hair near the base of the bookshelf. Blonde. Human. UNBURNT. He made no remark, only placed it into a small envelope. That night, he requested the staff leave a single lamp on in the study and the door slightly ajar. Then he retired, not to sleep but to wait. He did not think the mystery would knock again so soon, but he intended to be listening when it did. The suspects were all in place. Each had motive, yet none with opportunity, or so they claimed. But someone, Poirot was certain, was terrified that the past was being unearthed, and Poirot, more certain still, knew the game had only just begun. The following morning, Poirot descended into the drawing room precisely at 8:30 a.m., fully dressed in his light grey suit, with a tie as straight as the crease in his trousers and shoes that gleamed like polished mirrors. He was already sipping his preferred tisane, brought up earlier by a silently impressed maid, when the family began to emerge one by one, sleep-deprived and clearly unsettled by his presence. He observed them all, with quiet calculation. He was not merely watching their faces, but their rhythm. Who made eye contact? Who avoided him? Who hesitated before speaking? He was not yet asking difficult questions, but already they were answering them. Lady Eugenia was first to approach, her voice still clipped and proper, though thinner than the night before. Monsieur Poirot, I would like to thank you for coming. I trust your accommodations are satisfactory. May we, madam? Poirot said gently. Everything is in perfect order. But, of course, order is my nature. Disorder, however. He let the sentence trail with an elegant shrug. That is why I am here. She nodded tightly, folding her hands in front of her, and glanced around the room. There will be no breakfast served in the dining room today. I've asked the staff to provide trays. I find myself quite fatigued. Poirot bowed his head slightly. Quite understandable, madam. But if I may ask, has anything else unusual occurred? Any further correspondence? Lady Eugenia hesitated only a fraction too long. No, she replied. Nothing at all. Poirot filed that pause away. Once she had retreated to her study, Poirot began his methodical sweep of the household, not with gloves and fingerprint kits, but with small talk and minor disruptions. He asked the maid for his shoes to be brushed. Again, not because they needed it, but to see how long she'd be away from her duties. He requested hot water from the kitchen just as the cook was speaking with the butler. Forcing a break in their conversation, he asked Oliver Northcote about photography casually. Over a walk through the rose garden. Oliver was quick to preen. Yes, I've done a bit of developing. London studio. Light and shadow. That sort of thing. Fascinating how the mind fills in what the eye cannot see, eh? Poirot smiled politely. And you prefer analog work, monsieur? Oh yes, Oliver said. Digital lacks soul. Besides, There's something thrilling about the physicality of it. Developing images in the darkroom, seeing a shape emerge. From nothing. Magic. Almost. Poirot tilted his head. And when was your last session in this magical room? Oh, must have been a few weeks ago. I haven't had much time since returning here. Mother insists I accompany her on these rural visits. I think she hopes I'll marry Clara. Poirot's brows lifted minutely. And is that something you wish? Oliver gave a hollow laugh. Not particularly. Clara's clever, but dull. Always writing letters and sighing out windows. Poirot thanked him with a nod and strolled back toward the house, passing a gardener who avoided eye contact, and a footman pretending not to be listening. These details, Poirot knew, were the dust on the mantel, harmless alone, but telling in accumulation. He returned to the study where the second photograph had been placed, and requested that the household leave him undisturbed for 1 hour. Mrs. Harbottle, ever obedient, locked the door behind him. Inside. Poirot sat quietly and observed. There were no hidden compartments, no secret doors. But there was a fireplace with a grate that had been scrubbed a bit to clean. A faint line on the wooden floor suggested a heavy chair had recently been dragged backward, and on the windowsill, wedged in the corner behind the curtains, a single paperclip bent slightly, as if twisted nervously. He catalogued it all without comment. At exactly 10:45. He rang for Clara. She arrived with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. Monsieur Poirot, please, mademoiselle, join me. He gestured to the chair opposite his. You are very fond of your aunt, are you not? Yes, of course. And she of you, I imagine. No children of her own. You are her closest relation. Clara nodded. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Yet, you called me, not her. Clara hesitated. I was afraid she would refuse. She still thinks this can be explained away, that it's some cruel joke. But I don't believe that. Not after what happened to Mr. Teversham. Ah, yes, the solicitor. How well did you know him? Clara's voice grew more guarded. Not well. He came for estate matters, of course. But we didn't speak privately. Poirot folded his hands. Forgive me, mademoiselle, but you are lying. Not to deceive, but to protect someone. Perhaps your aunt, or perhaps yourself. Clara's eyes flicked down, then up again. We exchanged letters. That's all. About what? Her voice dropped. About a will. Poirot remained still. Go on. After Aunt Eugenia's health scare last year, she asked Mr. Teversham to draft an update. She didn't want anyone to know. She planned to leave everything to me, but she made him promise to delay filing it until she was absolutely certain of recovery. Poirot's voice remained soft, and Clara bit her lip. He sent her a draft. But then she changed her mind. Or at least she said she did. A month ago, she told him to destroy the documents. But he didn't. Poirot raised a single brow. You're sure of this? He told me. He thought she might regret it later. He said he kept a copy in his flat. Poirot absorbed this in silence. Do you think someone killed him because of that? She asked quietly. Poirot rose and walked to the fireplace. I think someone is very invested in what truth survives, and someone else perhaps. Your aunt is not being entirely honest about what she remembers from those years. He turned back. Mademoiselle, may I ask something delicate, of course? Did Lady Eugenia ever speak to you of Lily Caro? Clara looked startled. No, only once, years ago, and she dismissed her as a brief disgrace, said it was wartime madness. Why? Because whoever sent these photographs wishes to challenge that story and photographs. Mademoiselle, they are very persuasive liars. A knock came at the door. It was Mrs. Harbottle again, her tone urgent. Pardon me, monsieur, but there's been another delivery. Poirot turned slowly. Mrs. Harbottle handed him a small envelope cream-colored, identical to the first two. This one had been left on Lady Eugenia's breakfast tray. Poirot opened it with care. Inside, a single photograph. It showed Lady Eugenia standing alone in the hallway of Farnley Manor, gazing directly into the camera. The timestamp read, today, 6:04 a.m., and she had sworn she hadn't left her room since the night before. With the third photograph laid before him, its timestamp unmistakable. Its implications undeniable. Poirot sat alone for several minutes in Lady Eugenia's study, not speaking, not moving, simply observing the image. Her posture in the photo was too deliberate, too centered. It had not been captured in haste. The composition suggested knowledge, intention. Yet she had claimed not to have left her room that morning. If this photograph were real, either she, Zyde, or someone else was engineering an illusion so precise it rivaled truth itself. By mid-morning, Poirot requested private interviews with each resident and staff member in the manor, beginning with those whose routines offered the most potential for unnoticed movements. The housekeeper, Mrs. Harbottle, was first. She entered stiffly, eyes lowered. You wished to see me, monsieur? Yes, madam. Please, be seated. Poirot motioned to the armchair opposite. Tell me, who brought Lady Eugenia her breakfast? Tray this morning? I did, she replied promptly, as I do every day. No one else is permitted into her rooms before noon. And when you left the tray at approximately 7:05, she didn't open the door fully, just took it from my hands. Poirot nodded. And was there anything already on the tray? No, I prepared it myself. I carried it from the kitchen to her door without setting it down. Poirot lifted the envelope containing the latest photograph. And yet, when she returned the tray, this was resting atop the saucer. Did you observe anything unusual when you came to collect it? She hesitated. It was lighter than usual. The cup had been untouched, so had the toast. I thought perhaps she was unwell or preoccupied. I wouldn't presume to say. Poirot leaned back. And how many copies of the house keys exist? 3 master keys. I have one. Mr. Bexley holds the second. The third is kept locked in the utility cupboard downstairs. Could that key be accessed without your knowledge? Mrs. Harbottle's jaw tensed. Only if someone broke the lock, which they would know how to do, if they were familiar with this house. She did not answer. Poirot dismissed her gently, thanking her for her time. Next, he called Mr. Edward Bexley, the estate manager. Bexley arrived smelling faintly of pipe smoke and irritation. I've already spoken to Inspector Drew, he said. lowering himself into the chair without invitation. "Indeed," Poirot replied calmly, "but I am not Inspector Drew. Tell me, monsieur, where were you this morning between 6 and 7? "Asleep," Bexley grunted. "Why? What's happened now?" Poirot showed him the photograph. Bexley blinked, then snorted. "Well, that's not right. No, monsieur, it is very not right. Yet someone took this photo inside this house within the hour Lady Eugenia claims. She never left her room. She wouldn't. She's barely spoken to anyone since the solicitor's death." Poirot narrowed his gaze. "And yet, in this photograph, she is upright, dressed, and standing quite still staring into the lens. What do you make of that?" Bexley frowned. "I don't know, but I'll tell you this Lady Eugenia hates being photographed. Always has. She's had staff dismissed for taking pictures at events without permission." Poirot inclined his head. Curious, then, that she would pose knowingly for one, or that someone would risk capturing her likeness against her will. Bexley shifted. "Is it possible the photo was staged, a double?" Poirot made a steeple of his fingers. "The camera sees what it is given, monsieur, but it is the mind that interprets. Thank you. That will be all." Next came Adelaide Northgate, the widowed cousin. She arrived with lipstick freshly applied, and a playful tilt to her head. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, how mysterious everything is. Another photograph, I presume?" Poirot offered a thin smile. "Madam, you have a remarkable intuition. I pride myself on it." He gestured to the armchair. "Do sit. You were awake early this morning." "Oh, I rise before the sun. Terrible habit from my late husband's schedule. I took my tea in the east parlour round 6:15. Read the paper. Nothing unusual. Did you see anyone else awake?" "I thought I heard Oliver's door creak open at one point, probably sneaking out for a cigarette. But no one passed the parlour." Poirot filed that away. "And you knew Lily?" "Caro," Adelaide smirked. "Only by reputation. Scandalous little thing. All silk and tragedy. Peter Farnley's great shame, I believe. Do you think Lady Eugenia was ever jealous?" "Oh, certainly, but she'd die before admitting it." "Do you think," Poirot asked smoothly, "that she could have taken revenge on Lily?" Adelaide raised an eyebrow. "My dear Poirot, are you suggesting Lady Eugenia murdered someone and waited 20 years to be haunted by it? Deliciously Gothic, but unlikely. If she had done such a thing, she'd have made sure no trace remained." Poirot did not laugh. "Madam, in my experience, it is precisely those who make no trace who leave the most." He called in Oliver Northgate. Next, the young man entered yawning, in slippers, holding a half-eaten apple. "You're very busy today," Oliver said, slumping into the chair. "You were seen leaving your room early," Poirot began. Oliver shrugged. "Went for a smoke. Couldn't sleep. Too much tension in this place. And did you see anyone?" "No. Just fog and hedges." Poirot took out the new photograph. "Tell me what you see." Oliver blinked. "Well, that's Lady Eugenia. In the corridor. And where do you suppose the photographer stood?" He leaned closer. "Looks like just outside the library. Slight angle from the side. Maybe 10 feet away." Would someone have had time to take this picture and slip the envelope onto a breakfast tray? Within 15 minutes. Depends. Who it was. He paused. Someone who knows the routines. Knows where everyone is, or thinks they do. Did you take the photograph? Oliver laughed. Please? If I had, I'd have framed it better. Poirot said nothing. After Oliver, Clara returned. She looked pale, but calm. Monsieur, has my aunt seen the photograph yet? No. I am waiting for the right moment. Clara, where were you this morning? At 6. She hesitated. In the library. I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to be in my room. Did you see your aunt? No. Just the butler. He was polishing silver in the dining room. Did you leave the library at any point? Only to get a blanket? It was cold. Poirot steepled his fingers again. Would you say your aunt is still fully in command of her faculties? Clara straightened. Yes, she is forgetful at times, but she is not confused. Is she capable of deception? Clara hesitated. Only if she believed it was necessary to preserve something or protect someone. Poirot thanked her. Lastly, Poirot requested an interview with Lady Eugenia herself. She refused. Clara returned 10 minutes later, quietly, and said, She is locked in her room and not taking visitors. She said she needs silence to think. Poirot nodded gravely. He returned to the drawing room and stood before the family portrait above the fireplace. A stiff oil painting of Lord and Lady Farnley posed beside a grand piano, a spaniel. At their feet, he stared at Lord Farnley's painted eyes, then at the real eyes he had seen in the photograph's solder, haunted, still alive when he shouldn't have been. Someone here knew the truth. Someone here had seen the past with unflinching clarity and was now engineering illusions. To keep it buried, or worse, to bring it to the surface. But which was it? Poirot now had testimonies, contradictions, and a house full of unsettled eyes. What he needed next was a mistake. The following day dawned with thick fog crawling across the lawn of Farnley Manor, wrapping the estate in a cloak of secrecy that felt almost theatrical. Hercule Poirot rose early, not out of restlessness, but because his instincts told him the stage was now set for something or someone to slip. And slip they did at precisely 7:52 a.m. A housemaid named Elsie burst into the breakfast parlor, white as linen, holding a black leather satchel that had been found lodged behind the curtain rod in the second-floor corridor, an odd place, high above reach, requiring a stool or ladder to hide something so deliberately. She claimed it had only become visible when she opened the window to beat out the dust. Naturally, Poirot asked that no one touch it. He arrived promptly, Mrs. Harbottle in tow. With gloves borrowed from the scullery, he retrieved the bag carefully, unfastened the worn clasp, and extracted 3 contents: a pair of dark gloves, a roll of film negatives, and a small, polished camera, an old model, perhaps 20 years old, but still fully functional, and scratched on the underside. Almost imperceptibly, Northcote by 10 o'clock. The entire household was aware that Oliver Northcote's camera had been found, hidden in a location not easily accessible without forethought. Rumors flared like sparks in dry grass. The gardener told the cook. The cook told the butler. The butler said nothing, but listened closely. Clara heard it from the maid, who refused to clean the corridor again. Poirot, however, said very little until he requested that Oliver join him in the library for a friendly conversation. Oliver entered with the false bravado of a man who still thinks the accusation is beneath him. "A hidden camera, monsieur," Poirot began softly, "bearing your initials. Film that may very well match the undeveloped negatives from the photographs already received. What say you?" Oliver raised his hands. "All right. Yes, it's my camera. But I didn't hide it there. I haven't used that thing in years. It went missing months ago, actually. I assumed it was lost in one of the boxes when we moved things out of the West Wing for repairs." Poirot tilted his head. "And you reported the loss to whom?" Oliver hesitated. "Well, no one, really. I didn't think it mattered." "Curious," Poirot murmured, "how so many objects in this house go unmissed until they return under suspicion." Oliver grew defensive. "Look, I've taken some odd photos in my time, sure, but I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't upset Aunt Eugenia like that. I don't even know where these images came from." Poirot gave a thin smile. "You are an artist, Non. You understand lighting, shadows, manipulation. If anyone in this house could stage such photographs, it would be you. But I didn't. I swear it." Poirot leaned forward. "Then who would have access to your camera?" "Monsieur." Oliver's eyes narrowed. "Anyone. Staff. My mother. Even Clara, she knows where I keep my things." Poirot caught the flicker in his voice. "You suspect Clara?" Oliver shrugged. "She's the one who called you, isn't she? Maybe she wanted attention, or maybe she thought this would force my aunt's hand. With the inheritance and all." Poirot's tone sharpened. "You tread dangerously, monsieur. Mademoiselle Clara has shown nothing but integrity." Oliver grinned, deflecting again. "Look, if this is some twisted art prank, it's not mine. Someone's trying to frame me." Poirot nodded. "So it would appear." Oliver blinked. "Wait, you believe me." Poirot stood. "Non. I said appear. And appearances, Monsieur Northcote, are the very currency of deception." The film negatives were sent via special courier to a photographic technician in London, whom Poirot trusted implicitly. While he awaited the report, Poirot allowed the news of Oliver's implication to marinate within the household. Reactions came swiftly. Adelaide Northcote approached Poirot later that evening, her voice tight. "I hope you understand, monsieur. My son is not clever enough for this. If he'd staged those photographs, they'd be riddled with overexposure and clumsy symbolism." Poirot merely nodded. "A mother's belief is admirable, madam, but often unreliable." "She may be cold," Adelaide said suddenly, "but Eugenia isn't mad. And if she's afraid, it's because something real is coming back to haunt her." Poirot pressed. "Are you suggesting the photographs are genuine?" "I'm suggesting that someone, possibly someone long thought dead, is manipulating all of us. Peter Farnler made enemies in his time, monsieur. Did you know them?" Adelaide smiled faintly. "No one admits to knowing a man's mistress, but everyone talks. There were whispers Lily Caro didn't disappear, that she left quietly. Yes, but with something valuable." Poirot's brow lifted. a child. Adelaide gave him a long, unreadable look. Poirot returned to his room that night with that look still lingering in his mind. A child, now grown, with cause for revenge, or justice, or answers. By midday the next day, the photographic report arrived. The negatives, though aged, were developed with precision to match the first photographs sent to the household, Lord Farnler and Lily Carrow, the hospital room with the older Lord Farnler, and finally, Lady Eugenia in the corridor, time-stamped. That very week. All were genuine, not montages, not digital fabrications. Genuine exposures captured on the same camera model, developed on similar paper stock. The only inconsistency? The third photograph, the one of Lady Eugenia, showed subtle signs of double exposure. Faint shadows in the corner, a warped outline. Behind her, Poirot narrowed his eyes at the image, a photograph designed to disturb, to mislead. Not just a message, but a trap. Someone wanted suspicion. Someone planted the camera, ensured its discovery, and intended for Oliver to be caught. In the web, a false lead. He returned to Clara that evening. "Tell me, mademoiselle," he began, "how long have you suspected that someone was trying to discredit your family?" Clara seemed startled. I'm not sure I ever stopped suspecting it." "Then, let us consider," Poirot said gently, "not who benefits from the inheritance, but who benefits from the scandal." She nodded slowly. "You don't believe Oliver is guilty, do you?" "I believe he is guilty of foolishness," Poirot replied, "and perhaps ego, but not of masterminding this." He showed her the double-exposed image. She stared at it for a long time, then said, quietly, "There's something off." Her face, her posture. It's like she knew it was coming. Poirot said nothing. That night, Poirot walked the halls alone again, checking doors, window locks, listening to the rhythm of the Manor's breath. As he passed the guest wing, he heard soft sobbing coming from Lady Eugenia's chambers. He stopped, not because the sound was foreign, but because it wasn't hers. It was younger and full of grief. He waited, then walked on. A false lead had served its purpose. The true trail, half buried in memory and carefully staged photographs, was just beginning to clear. The next morning, Poirot altered his rhythm. He rose later than usual, took his tea in the west-facing study rather than the dining room, and announced to the household that he would be staying on for 2 more days only. It was a deliberate statement, just loud enough for Mrs. Harbottle to overhear, and certainly for her to pass along. Poirot knew what he was doing. The mind under pressure does not always remain silent. It begins to speak in slips, in glances, in curious movements. And he intended to watch very closely. He began with small, strategic shifts after breakfast. He complimented Oliver Northcote on his artistic sensibilities. "Your eye for composition is very sharp," Poirot said lightly. "The photo of Lady Eugenia, for example, so perfectly balanced. It could almost be posed." Oliver blinked. "I didn't." "Ah, but that is the beauty of it," Poirot interrupted, smiling. "We see ourselves in what we don't do." Nest's pause. He let the remark hang, then turned and left. Behind him, Oliver stood with a frown, unsure whether he had been accused or congratulated. Poirot's next stop was with Clara. He found her seated in the rose garden, notebook in hand, her pen hovering but not writing. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "you are troubled?" She nodded. "I keep going over everything in my head. The photographs, my aunt's behavior, that camera. None of it makes sense." Poirot sat beside her. "Tell me, do you remember your aunt being absent from the house, even briefly, in the past few weeks? Perhaps at night?" Clara frowned. Once, about a week before you came. I knocked to remind her about her medication, and she wasn't in her room. She returned 10 minutes later and said she'd been walking in the garden. But it was nearly midnight, and you believed her. I wanted to." Poirot clasped his hands in his lap. "Sometimes, mademoiselle, we believe what allows us to sleep. But I wonder now, has your aunt begun to forget things more frequently? She repeats herself," Clara admitted, "but she still knows who we are. She remembers things from years ago with perfect clarity. It's the recent days that seem hazy." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then perhaps someone has made them hazy." He returned inside and spent the remainder of the morning rearranging certain objects in the household without announcement. He removed the framed family photo from the hallway and replaced it with a photograph of the Farnlow estate, an older one, sourced from the Manor's archives. He adjusted the clock in the drawing room by 10 minutes. He asked the cook to switch the order of the meals for the day. All subtle changes by the afternoon. He gathered the household for a casual tea in the parlor, his suggestion. There was no formal announcement, no interrogation, just the simple, suggestive company of others. And Poirot watched. Lady Eugenia entered slowly, dressed in darker tones than usual. Her brooch slightly misaligned, an imperfection uncharacteristic of her. Clara poured tea for her aunt and sat silently beside her. Oliver hovered in the corner, deliberately avoiding Adelaide's gaze. Mrs. Harbottle stood at the back of the room with her hands folded. "I've noticed," Poirot said mildly, "that we are all affected by the past more than we care to admit." Lady Eugenia stiffened. The past should stay buried. Yet it has a way of rising. None, Poirot smiled, especially when it is not properly mourned. Adelaide laughed dryly. "A haunting, then? Are you saying Peter's ghost is sending US photographs, not his ghost?" Poirot said gently, "but perhaps his memory, manipulated, fractured, used." Oliver interrupted. "Are we any closer to knowing who's responsible? Or are we just drinking tea until someone else ends up dead?" The room went still. Poirot turned to Oliver. "You believe someone will die?" "I think someone already has," Oliver muttered. "Mr. Teversham didn't shoot himself, and whoever planted that camera wanted me blamed. So yes, I think this isn't over." Poirot nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch. Then, rising, he excused himself and asked to speak to Lady Eugenia alone. She hesitated, then waved Clara away with a thin flick of the hand dot in the study. Poirot closed the door softly and turned to face her. "Madam," he said, "I must ask you directly. Do you recall standing in the hallway at 6 o'clock on the morning the last photograph was taken?" She blinked. "No." Do you deny that it was you in the photograph? I don't know. You are unsure? Lady Eugenia's eyes, usually so cold and sharp, now looked bewildered. Everything has become jumbled. I thought I saw Peter in the corridor 2 nights ago. But, of course, he's been dead for years. Poirot stepped closer. Madam, have you taken any new medications recently? A different sleeping tonic. Dr. Hill sent it. Something for restlessness. Poirot nodded. And since then, have your dreams become real? She gave a trembling laugh. Yes, I can't always tell which is which. Poirot grew still. Did you under the influence of this tonic wander the halls without realizing it? I don't know. I may have. But surely that doesn't explain the photographs. No, Poirot said softly. But it explains how someone else could take them and know exactly where you would be. Lady Eugenia looked up slowly. You think I'm being used? I know you are. He left her with that and returned to his room. Now he had confirmation. Someone within the house was exploiting Eugenia's confusion staging. Photographs, planting objects, orchestrating fear. A psychological siege. Not to punish her, but to break her. That evening, Poirot made one final test. He summoned Clara, Adelaide, Oliver, and Mr. Bexley to the library. In the center of the room, on a table, he placed a single black envelope. I received this in the post today, he announced. It contains a photograph of the next victim. He did not say whose. He did not open it. He simply stepped back and watched. Adelaide's hand twitched, but she stayed composed. Oliver looked at the envelope, then at the others, saying nothing. Bexley swallowed hard and averted his eyes. But Clara took a step forward. Is this real? She asked softly. Poirot said nothing. Then Clara turned not to leave but to face Mr. Bexley directly. You knew about the second will, didn't you? Bexley looked startled. What are you? She told you to destroy it. Clara continued. But you didn't. You kept it. Just like Mr. Teversham did. Poirot stepped in. That is very interesting, mademoiselle. Because if someone wanted that will buried forever, they might remove anyone who knew of it. And who better than the man with the keys? The man who controls who enters and exits the manor. Bexley stood abruptly. This is absurd. Is it? Poirot said coolly. Or is it simply inconvenient that your careful manipulation of Lady Eugenia's schedule made her vulnerable, that you used her confusion, her trust, her guilt over Peter's affair all to craft a reality where truth was twisted just enough to terrify her into silence? Bexley took a step back. You had access to the old camera. Poirot continued. You had access to the study, to the darkroom. You knew Oliver's habits. And you counted on his arrogance to deflect suspicion. I didn't. Bexley began. Poirot raised a hand. You planned to make it look like Oliver and Clara were both untrustworthy, that the family was broken, that Lady Eugenia was losing her mind. And then, quietly, you would position yourself trusted, efficient, indispensable as executor of the estate. You had motive and the mind for precision. Bexley froze. Poirot turned to Clara. But, mademoiselle, I believe you knew. Not the full truth, but enough. And you waited? Clara's eyes brimmed. I didn't want to believe it. Poirot nodded. But the truth is indifferent to belief. He walked over to the black envelope, opened it, and showed them all the contents. It was blank. Sometimes, Poirot said, all that is needed is a mirror. Bexley slumped into the chair. The psychological web had stretched and snapped. And now, with the illusion shattered, Poirot would begin to unravel every last thread. The next morning broke with an unnatural stillness over Farnley Manor. It was as though the house itself held its breath. The confrontation with Bexley had cracked the veneer of composure that had coated the estate. For so long, he had not confessed, not entirely, but he had said nothing further. Silence, Poirot knew, was its own kind of admission. And yet something about it all sat uncomfortably with Poirot. The precision of the plan, the psychological manipulation, the exploitation of Eugenia's mental fragility. It fit Bexley's personality. Yes, but the photographs, the timestamps, the ghostly clarity, that work had the feel of something more personal, not just clever, vengeful. Poirot had risen early and taken a walk along the rear grounds, where the dew clung thick to the grass and a thin mist still rose from the hedges. As he passed the eastern fountain unused for years, he paused, drawn by a flash of reflected light. Nestled beneath the rim, wedged under an old stone cherub, was a small tin box. Carefully, Poirot pried it loose. Inside were 3 photographs, older than the ones previously delivered. One showed a young woman, Lily Carrow, standing in front of what looked like a hospital entrance, visibly pregnant. The second showed her cradling a newborn. The third, more recent by perhaps a decade, showed a young child no more than 10 standing beside a woman whose face was partially obscured by her hat. There was no writing, no note, just the images. Poirot returned swiftly to the manor and locked himself in the study. He laid out all the photographs, placing the new set alongside the ones already documented. He did not need to say it aloud, but the implication was undeniable. A child. The photographs had not been about Lady Eugenia's guilt alone. They were breadcrumbs, a trail. Someone was not merely tormenting a dying woman, they were announcing. THEMSELVESA knock broke his focus. It was Clara. Breathless. Monsieur Poirot, you need to come. It's Lady Eugenia. He followed her without question. They reached Lady Eugenia's chambers to find her seated upright in bed, her eyes fixed blankly at the far wall. Her hands rested limply in her lap. The maid hovered nearby, frightened, whispering that she had found the door wide open and the window unlatched. Poirot approached carefully. Lady Eugenia. No response. He stepped closer and gently touched her wrist. She was alive, but barely responsive. Call Dr. Hill, Poirot said sharply. Now, Clara had already sent for him. She's not speaking, just staring. It's as if she's been emptied. Poirot examined the nightstand. Her sleeping tonic had been replaced. The bottle was half empty. But this one was different, labeled in a different handwriting, and stronger. He turned back to the maid. Who administered this? I don't know. It wasn't me. Poirot stepped toward the window. Mud tracks barely visible led in from the garden, across the carpet. Someone had entered from outside, quietly, deliberately. Clara, he said quietly, search the guest wing. Now, she returned 10 minutes later, her face pale. Adelaide, she's gone. Gone? Her room is empty. Her suitcase is missing. And one of the back doors was found unlocked. Poirot did not curse, but in his mind, he felt it. Adelaide Northcote, always watching, always too composed. She had played the role of detached observer so well. But now, the shape of her presence in the puzzle was becoming clear. He called the others to the drawing-room. Oliver, Clara. Mrs. Harbotterland made his announcement. Lady Eugenia was drugged during the night, not fatally, but enough to render her helpless. Gasps followed, and Oliver rose. Drugged. By who? By someone who wished to keep her from speaking, perhaps because the truth is very near. Adelaide Northcote is no longer in the house. She has fled. Clara's voice trembled. Do you think she was Lily Caro's sister? Poirot turned. No, I think she was Lily Caro. Silence fell. Oliver blinked. What? Poirot continued, voice steady. Think of her age, her carefully guarded distance. The way she spoke of Peter Farnlow with disdain, then pity. The way she knew how to push Eugenia just to the edge, but never over it. She knew every secret, every weak point, and most of all, she was obsessed with what had been taken from her. Clara looked stunned. But Lily Caro disappeared. Poirot nodded. She changed her name, reinvented herself, returned under the guise of a cousin-in-law. Years later, she timed it perfectly, arrived just before the solicitor's death, just before the will, just before the photographs began. Oliver still seemed stunned. But the child? Poirot turned to him. There was a child, a boy, born in secret, sent away, perhaps adopted, or hidden under another name. We may never know. But Lily Adelaide believed he had been erased from history, that Eugenia had covered it up to protect her reputation. So she planned to expose it, to haunt her, not with violence but with memory, staged photographs, psychological torment. And when she saw that Eugenia had begun to break, she intensified the campaign, even involved Bexley perhaps as a scapegoat. Perhaps an accomplice promised a share of the estate once Eugenia was declared incompetent. Clara murmured, "That's why she waited so long." Poirot nodded. Revenge is patient when it must be. But something changed. Perhaps Eugenia began to remember too much. Or perhaps Lily feared she might confess the truth. So she administered a dose meant to silence her but not kill. That would have risked losing everything. And when it went wrong, she vanished. Poirot stepped to the window, gazing out at the grounds. There is a car missing, Mrs. Harbottle said suddenly. One of the estate's older models. I saw it wasn't in the garage this morning. Poirot turned. Get the registration to Inspector Drew, now. By nightfall, word came. The vehicle had been spotted near Dover. Authorities had been alerted. Adelaide Lily was gone, but not undetected. The law would now take up the chase. Poirot returned to Lady Eugenia's bedside. Dr. Hill had arrived, administered treatment, and assured Clara that she would recover in time. But her eyes remained vacant, as if memory itself had turned to fog. Poirot sat beside her for a long time, saying nothing. At last, she turned her head slightly. Her voice was a whisper. She hated me. Poirot replied softly, "Because you survived." "No," she said, tears forming. "Because I took him." Poirot waited. She came back. One night, years later, with the boy, said she wanted Peter to see him. I told her he was dead. She screamed at me, called me a thief. I gave her money, told her never to return. She vanished. Poirot nodded. And the boy, Eugenia closed her eyes. I don't know. She wouldn't tell me his name. Poirot reached into his pocket, took out the photo of the child, and placed it gently in her hand. Eugenia wept. Outside, the fog had begun to lift. But inside Farnley Manor, shadows of the past remained. And Hercule Poirot knew the case was far from over. The air inside Farnley Manor had changed. The tremor of scandal still vibrated in its walls, but the atmosphere had thickened into something more reflective, like the silence that follows a storm. When leaves are flattened against the ground and the sky is heavy with what it almost revealed. Lady Eugenia, sedated and still recovering, remained in her chambers. Clara had taken it upon herself to oversee her aunt's care, rarely leaving her side. Oliver lingered around the house in a subdued state, no longer argumentative, but confused and ashamed by how close he had come to being vilified. Bexley kept to his room, and though Poirot had no conclusive proof to tie him directly to Adelaide's scheme, his silence now seemed more self-preserving than guilty. Yet Poirot himself was not satisfied. He had solved the outer mystery, identified the tormentor, exposed the motivations, and begun to untangle the long-buried threads of Lady Eugenia's cruelty and Adelaide's revenge. But something still rang false. The photographs they had always bothered him, not simply because they were convincing, but because they were perfectly convincing, to perfect, to well-timed. And the more Poirot dwelled on them, the more he began to suspect that there had been a subtle deception beneath the primary one. A detail so small, so precise, that it had passed beneath the noses of everyone else, including himself, until now he laid them all out again. 13 photographs, some black and white, some slightly tinted with age, all dated with stamps too consistent to have come from multiple devices or eras. The image of Peter Farnley and Lily Carrow, the staged hospital scene, Lady Eugenia in the hallway, the child with the obscured guardian. He studied the lighting, the angles, the framing, and then, finally, he saw it in the photo of Lady Eugenia. In the corridor, the one supposedly taken just before it was slipped onto her breakfast tray. The wall-mounted sconce directly behind her cast its light in a downward cone, a minor architectural feature, easily missed. But in that photo, the bulb was frosted. In every other photo taken indoors, that same sconce, identical in design, had clear bulbs. Poirot rose immediately and went to the corridor, the sconce in Question 1 of 5 in the hallway still had a clear bulb. He checked the remaining fixtures. All the same, he called for Mrs. Harbottle. "Have any of these bulbs been changed recently?" "No, monsieur, not in years." I order them in sets to ensure uniformity. Then tell me, Poirot said, pointing at the one from the photograph. Why was this bulb frosted 2 days ago and clear now? Mrs. Harbottle blinked. It wasn't. Are you certain? Yes. Poirot pressed his lips together. Then, the photograph was not taken 2 days ago. It was taken much earlier at a time when that particular bulb was different. Or perhaps in a place that merely resembled this hallway. His eyes narrowed. Do we have another corridor with the same wall sconces? Mrs. Harbottle thought for a moment. The old servants' wing. It's been unused since the war. But the fixtures they were replaced to match the main hall. Poirot hurried down the east wing, unlocking the heavy door that sealed the servants' wing from the main household. The smell of dust and disuse clung thickly to the air. Old furniture, moth-eaten curtains, and abandoned cleaning supplies littered the rooms. But in the second corridor, he found them 5 identical sconces, all with frosted bulbs. And halfway down the hallway, a faded carpet where a small armchair had clearly once stood. Beside it, the faint mark of a wooden stool. It was a replica, not a coincidence. A perfect reconstruction. The photo of Lady Eugenia had never been taken in the corridor where it claimed to be. It had been staged likely with Eugenia herself, drugged or coaxed into participating, and then delivered with a fabricated time stamp. Poirot returned to the study with a renewed clarity. Adelaide Lilly had recreated the space in secret, but she hadn't done it alone. The setting, the lighting, the ability to alter time stamps on a camera. That required not just psychological planning, but technical expertise. He rang for Clara. She entered warily, dark circles beneath her eyes. "Is it about the corridor?" she asked. "I saw you go in that way. You've always been observant." "Mademoiselle," Poirot said kindly, "but I wonder, was it merely observation? Or were you looking for something specific?" She froze. Poirot stepped closer. "You knew about the servants' wing. You've used it before." Clara looked away. "Only when I needed to be alone. And did you ever lend that solitude to someone else?" Poirot pressed. "Perhaps a woman who wanted to stage a photograph in perfect secrecy?" Clara's throat tightened. She asked for help, said it was just for theatre, that she was trying to make Aunt Eugenia face old truths. "I thought it was harmless." "And did you take any of the photographs yourself?" "No," Clara whispered. "But I stood in for her once, to frame the shot." Poirot paused. "You mean she didn't appear in some of them?" Clara hesitated. "Not all. Some were composites. She said it was about symbolism, that Aunt Eugenia would recognize what she needed to." Poirot sat heavily. "So the truth was not only staged but impersonated, and you intentionally, or not, became her accomplice." "I didn't know she would hurt her," Clara said quickly. "When I realized what was happening, I told her I wanted no part of it. That's when she began working alone." Poirot stared at the photographs. "She was preparing her exit even then. She said she just wanted Aunt Eugenia to remember." "She wanted more than that," Poirot said. "She wanted control. To show the world that she could manipulate the past into becoming the present. You were a pawn. And perhaps Bexley was, too." Clara's face crumpled. "Do you think the boy still lives?" Poirot looked down at the photo of the child. I believe so. She would not have destroyed him. He was her leverage. Perhaps he's out there, not even knowing who he truly is. Poirot turned back to the hidden clue, the light bulb. The smallest inconsistency, overlooked by all, a mistake Adelaide had not intended to make. Yet it had unraveled the illusion. Poirot stood. Mademoiselle, thank you for your honesty. This changes much, but not everything. As Clara left the study, Poirot gathered the photographs once more, aligning them in new configurations. Now they told a different story, not one of ghosts and guilt, but of calculated revenge through constructed memories. Adelaide had wanted to erase Eugenia's control over the past, and in doing so, she had nearly rewritten history. But truth, Poirot knew, was not so easily manipulated. It has patterns, inconsistencies, and if one looks closely enough a flaw. In the light, it was nearing dusk when Hercule Poirot requested the drawing room be prepared for a formal gathering. He made no announcement, gave no explanation, only asked that every resident and staff member at Farnley Manor be present. At precisely 6 o'clock, chairs were ranged in a semicircle beneath the stern gaze of Lord Farnley's portrait. The chandelier lit, the curtains drawn. The room had the air of a tribunal, as though the house itself demanded resolution. By 10 minutes to 6, the drawing room had filled with silent, uneasy figures. Clara arrived first, composed but pale, her eyes betraying the weight of what she now knew she had been part of. Oliver followed, fidgeting with his cufflinks, still unsure whether he was a suspect or a survivor. Mrs. Harbottle stood stiffly near the doorway, arms folded, watching everyone with the discreet suspicion of someone who had spent her life managing chaos behind locked doors. Bexley entered last, head slightly bowed, eyes avoiding contact. Poirot stood at the fireplace, his back to the room, gazing up at the oil portrait of Lord Farnley. He waited until the mantel clock ticked exactly to 6. Then he turned, folded his hands behind his back, and addressed them. Mesdames, messieurs, he began gently. Thank you for coming. The time has come for truth undiluted, complete, and without further shadow. He paced slowly, letting the tension mount. For weeks, this house has suffered under a campaign not of violence, but of suggestion. The past was resurrected not through confession or discovery, but through illusion. Photographs appeared, questions rose, certainty crumbled, and all of it, Ms. Amos, was by design. He turned to face them fully. At the heart of this campaign was a woman known to you as Adelaide Northcote, but her true name was Lily Carrow, the very mistress of Lord Farnley, who vanished after scandal, said to have disappeared abroad, forgotten by all but a few. Gasps echoed softly through the room. Oliver muttered a curse. Clara closed her eyes. She did not disappear. Poirot continued. She changed her name, re-entered society under a new identity, and she returned to this house not out of nostalgia but with a purpose, revenge. He began walking again, slow and deliberate. But let us not be distracted by the poetry of vengeance. Her scheme was cold, calculated. She studied this house, manipulated its rhythm, took advantage of Lady Eugenia's mental decline, and created evidence of events that had never happened, doctored photographs, constructed settings, and delivered them at carefully timed intervals to unnerve and isolate her victim. He turned to Clara, but Lily Caro did not act alone. Did she? Mademoiselle, Clara stood, eyes wide, mouth parted. No, she said quietly, she didn't. She used you, Poirot said, because you were kind and curious. She needed someone who had access to the unused parts of the manor, someone who could help her stage the spaces, build the illusion. You believed she was creating theater, symbolism, but she was crafting psychological warfare. I didn't know what she was planning, Clara said, almost pleading, when I realized it was too late. Poirot nodded, then turned to Oliver. And you, monsieur, you were not the villain but the diversion, the camera, hidden in the curtain, your initials carved into it, the envelope planted where only a casual search would find it, all meant to implicate you, not because you were dangerous but because you were impulsive, the perfect scapegoat. Oliver clenched his jaw. She made me look like a madman. We, Poirot said softly, because a madman draws attention and misdirection was essential. He then turned to Bexley. You, monsieur, were not innocent either. While I believe you did not take the photographs or drug Lady Eugenia yourself, you knew something was wrong. You kept secrets, especially regarding the second will, and you protected your own interest, even as the house began to crumble around you. Bexley said nothing. He didn't deny it. Poirot walked to the center of the room and gestured to the small tin box on the table beside him. Inside this box were photographs never sent of a child, a boy, born to Lily Caro in secrecy, hidden, possibly raised far from here. His name, his fate, we do not know, but he was real, and he was the core of her hatred. Poirot looked toward the staircase, as if addressing the house itself. Lady Eugenia confessed to me privately that Lily once returned, child in arms, asking that Peter Farnler acknowledge his son. She was turned away, paid off, silenced, the truth buried. That moment, I believe, forged the path Lily walked until her final day in this house. Poirot turned back to the assembled faces. You may ask why photographs? Why this theatricality? Because the camera does not lie, Ms. Amos, at least. That is what most believe. But Lily understood something deeper. Photographs do not reveal truth, they imply it. They suggest memory, and memory, when shaken, does the rest. He stepped forward again, voice lowering slightly. But every illusion has a flaw, and it was a flaw in the light, a single frosted bulb in a hallway that no longer existed. That revealed the deception. A photograph supposedly taken last week was in fact taken months before, in a different wing, staged to appear recent. It was the one inconsistency she could not control. The past left a trace, and with that, her mask unraveled. He returned to the fireplace. Lily fled. She is now being pursued by the authorities, and justice, I believe, will find her in due course. But justice in this case is not legal alone. It is emotional, moral. The consequences she set in motion will not disappear with her arrest. Lady Eugenia may never recover from what has been unearthed, This house may never be what it once was. Poirot paused, letting the weight of that truth settle. I do not ask you to forget what has happened here, but I do ask you to see it, not as a puzzle, not as a tragedy, but as the truth at last made visible through the very medium that was used to obscure it. He bowed his head. Thank you. He walked quietly toward the door. But just before he exited, he turned to Clara once more. You have courage, mademoiselle. Use it. Do not let this house bury another generation beneath silence. And with that, he stepped out, leaving the room heavy with truths that could no longer be unspoken. 2 days after the final gathering, with the manor still suspended in the aftershocks of confession, silence, and retreat, Hercule Poirot sat in the now emptied study preparing his notes. The events that had unfolded at Farnley were extraordinary, not for their theatrics, but for the intricacy of the psychological strategy that had nearly succeeded in toppling an entire family through suggestion, guilt, and photographic deceit. And yet one piece had remained loose in the machinery. The final deception, the ultimate answer, the identity of the trio are Chestrator. Not Lily Caro, not Adelaide Northcote, someone else. The question gnawed at Poirot, even after Adelaide's arrest in Dover the night before. She had been calm, almost cold, as officers pulled her from the quiet boarding house near the coast, her false identity exposed. She'd made no attempt to protest. It was always going to end like this, she'd said. But even as she was taken into custody, she'd added something Poirot could not forget. You still haven't asked the right question. That morning, Poirot summoned Clara one final time. She found him at the library table, photographs spread in meticulous rows. I thought it was over, she said. Poirot nodded. As did I. But mademoiselle, we must not mistake the collapse of a Whodunit for the resolution of the story. There is one detail left, a single thread unpulled. Clara sat slowly. What detail? Poirot picked up the photo of the child, standing beside the veiled woman. This child, this son of Lily Caro, was never seen again. We assumed he had been sent away, adopted, hidden. But what if he was not? What if he was close all along? Clara froze. What do you mean, Poirot? Lean forward. You told me once that you heard crying outside your aunt's room, crying that did not belong to her, and you dismissed it as imagination. But I never did. Clara blinked. You think someone else is here? No, Poirot said. I think someone else was always here. He pulled out the photo again and pointed to the child's face. At first glance, it is just a boy, anonymous, but note the chin, the ears, the structure of the mouth. Look again. Clara did, slowly. The blood drained from her face. Oliver, she whispered. Poirot nodded. Yes, she recoiled. That's not possible. He's Adelaide's son. He is now. But who? Was he before? Poirot stood and began pacing, slowly, gently unfolding the final truth. Adelaide Northcote adopted a child in 1926. The records are sealed, but I have confirmed it through a contact at the civil registry. That child was 10 months old, born to a woman matching Lily Caro's description. The location of the birth, a private clinic in Hampshire. Paid in cash. no father listed. The child was raised with Adelaide's surname, enrolled in London schools, introduced as her son. But Adelaide never married. Her late husband, Mr. Northcote, never existed. He was invented, a ghost, much like Lily's past. Clara whispered. She raised him. As a tool. She raised him, Poirot said carefully, as her son. But perhaps also as her vengeance. He turned to Clara again. Oliver did not know his true parentage, not at first. But Adelaide Lily would not have resisted forever. The truth, I believe, was revealed to him slowly, painfully. A boy told he was special, that his father abandoned him, that his bloodline was stolen, that his name should be Farnler. Clara stood, shaken. That's why he hated this house. Why he always mocked Aunt Eugenia behind her back. It wasn't just boredom. It was resentment. Poirot nodded, bitterness given form. And when the plan began, when the photographs started appearing, he did not resist. Perhaps he even participated, not with full understanding of the goal, but enough to believe he was restoring something. What was denied to him? Clara sat again, stunned. He really is Peter Farnley's son. Yes, Poirot said, and that is the truth Lady Eugenia feared most, the one she tried to erase. Not only Lily, but the heir that should have. Followed, Poirot laid out the final sequence. The camera was planted by Adelaide. But who moved it from room to room? Who placed the envelope outside Lady Eugenia's chamber when all others were accounted for? Who knew the layout of the house and could pass unnoticed at any hour? He raised a final photograph. Oliver Northcote, Farnler by blood, Caro by nurture. The only one capable of carrying out the final stage of the plan while the others suspected each other. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Mrs. Harbottle. "Mr. Oliver is missing," she said softly. "He didn't sleep in his bed. His suitcase is gone. So is one of the bicycles from the tool shed." Poirot gave a long, slow nod. "He knows," Clara's voice cracked. "Do you think he was ever told directly?" "No," Poirot replied. "But he knew." Adelaide didn't need to tell him with words. She raised him in a lie so precise that it became his identity. He turned back to Clara. "And you, mademoiselle, what will you do with the truth?" She looked down. "What can I do? The will is still unsigned. The house is still in my name. But it feels like it belongs to none of us." Poirot touched her shoulder gently. "Then perhaps it is time to let go. Not to forget, but to release what was never yours to carry." She nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. Poirot gathered the photographs for the final time and placed them in an envelope marked for Inspector Drew. He added a short letter detailing the events, the lineage, and the probable escape of Oliver Northcote, whether he would resurface, attempt a legal claim to the estate, or disappear into anonymity. Poirot could not say. That chapter, perhaps, would be written by another Dot as he prepared to depart the manor. He took one final stroll through the garden. The air was lighter now. The fog had lifted. Spring was making its quiet return. And in his breast pocket, Poirot carried a single photograph, the first one, the one that had started it all. Lord Peter Farnler and Lily Caro, standing together on a bright summer day, smiling, unaware of the future, unaware of how one photograph, one moment could echo through decades. Poirot glanced at it once more, then placed it back inside his coat. The photograph shouldn't have existed, but it had, and in doing so, it had exposed not just a crime but a legacy of silence. A week had passed since the storm of revelations at Farnley Manor, and with each passing day, the dust of deception began to settle, though not without scars. The manor, so long steeped in tradition, now felt exposed, as if its ancient walls no longer whispered privilege but echoed questions. The truth, once unthinkable, had been spoken, and in its wake, each soul connected to the house was forced to reckon with what remained. Adelaide Northcote Lily Carroll remained in custody. Scotland Yard had transferred her to a secure holding facility near London. She had refused legal counsel. During her initial interviews, she confessed only to the false identity and the manipulation of photographs, but insisted she had not meant to harm Lady Eugenia. She lived a lie, she said. I simply let her see it, despite the seriousness of the psychological damage inflicted. Legal experts were divided. No murder had been committed, and no direct theft attempted. Her crimes: identity fraud, blackmail through deception, trespassing, tampering with personal effects were unusual, complex, and largely without precedent. It was clear, however, that the courts would not treat her with leniency. The narrative of a wronged mistress would not outweigh the deliberate targeting of an elderly woman's mind. Hercule Poirot, when consulted by authorities, submitted a detailed report but declined to testify in person. She will be judged, he told Inspector Drew. But that judgment, I think, began the moment she handed the first envelope to the courier. As for Oliver Farnley by blood, Northcote by upbringing, he had not been found. The bicycle had turned up to town's east, abandoned at a train station in Canterbury. Poirot believed he had fled England, likely using a false name and cache, prepared by Adelaide well in advance. Wherever he goes, Poirot said quietly, he will take his bitterness with him. A life lived on shadows leaves no peace. Scotland Yard had debated issuing a warrant, but without confirmation of his complicity in any crime, and with Adelaide having accepted full responsibility, there was little legal foundation to pursue him. Yet for those who remained at Farnley Manor, Oliver's absence was not a relief, it was a wound. Clara, in particular, bore it deeply. She had spoken to Poirot before he departed, voicing her guilt, not only for assisting Adelaide unknowingly, but for never once asking questions of her cousin's history, never once pressing into the silence that had settled over the house for decades. I should have known, she said. I should have wondered more about the woman who appeared without roots. Poirot had replied, gently, the heart does not ask what it fears will hurt it. You were kind, and kindness, even when misused, is never weakness. In the weeks that followed, Clara began the quiet, painful work of reordering the manor. She dismissed Bexley, who resigned without protest, leaving behind a letter in which he admitted to safeguarding the second will draft. Out of misguided loyalty and cowardice, I feared what change would bring, he wrote. Now I see that stasis was worse. Mrs. Harbottle remained in place, but with diminished authority, She became more silent than usual. If that were possible, moving about the halls like a museum. Caretaker more than a housekeeper. Her loyalty to Eugenia remained, but she could not disguise the unease that now underpinned every glance toward Clara, as if unsure whether the past had truly finished its work. And Lady Eugenia? She recovered physically, but not completely. The doctors called it a functional collapse, the mind retreating after long-term stress and chemical interference. She could sit up, answer questions, and speak, but her memory had become unreliable. She often mistook Clara for her sister. Occasionally, she asked if Peter was still at sea. Poirot visited her once before he left for London. She recognized him. "Your name is Grey," she said, "and you carry a great deal of water in your shoes." He smiled. "Madam, your perception remains sharp." She reached for his hand and whispered, "Did I deserve this?" Poirot answered truthfully, "No one deserves revenge, madam, but none of us live without consequence." That evening, he walked once more through the estate grounds before boarding his train. The spring air was warmer now. The flowers, though modest, had begun to return. Yet nothing about Farnley felt alive. The land bore memory like old stones, bore moss quietly, persistently, never fading. On the train to London, Poirot sat by the window, his briefcase at his side. In it were the final photographs, sealed in an envelope marked "Do Not Destroy." He had considered handing them over to Scotland Yard or to Clara, but something told him these were no longer evidence. They were a record, a history only he had witnessed. In full, he opened his notebook and began writing not a formal case report, but a reflection. The train slowed as it approached Paddington Station, the evening light spilling through the carriage window in soft ribbons of gold and grey. Hercule Poirot sat perfectly still, his suitcase aligned precisely by his feet. The leather cover of his notebook closed but still warm from his last entry. Around him, other passengers stirred, stretching, collecting coats, preparing for the bustle of the platform. But Poirot remained unmoved, his thoughts still deep within the red-bricked corridors of Farnley Manor, where a single photograph had pulled an entire legacy to the surface. It had been, in many ways, a quieter case then. No bodies discovered in the drawing-room, no dagger thrust into a back, no poison in a decanter, and yet it had felt more intimate, more haunting than any murder. The crime had not targeted the body, but the mind, not life, but identity. Adelaide Lilly had not killed Lady Eugenia with her hands, but she had tried to unmake her with memories. That, Poirot knew, was no less devastating. As the train came to a full stop, Poirot collected his belongings and descended to the platform. The noise of London, so urgent, so careless, rushed to greet him. The illusion of forgetting. In the city, the past could vanish behind brick and pavement. But Poirot, as always, carried it with him. He made his way through the crowd, declined a cab, and walked the short distance to Whitehaven Mansions. As he reached his building, the doorman tipped his hat and handed him a small envelope. It was unmarked, save for a simple name, Hercule Poirot. He opened it inside the elevator. His Steps slowing. The handwriting was unmistakably Clara's. Inside were only a few words. She remembers more now. Not all of it, but enough to sleep. Thank you for helping her survive her own story. See? Poirot smiled faintly. He placed the note into his pocket with a kind of reverence. Survival was a victory not always recognized by courts or headlines. But to Poirot, it was often the most important outcome. Not every case needed a courtroom. Sometimes it needed only truth and someone willing to face it. He stepped into his flat, removed his coat, and began tidying his papers. There were other cases pending. Letters awaiting replies, invitations from colleagues, social events he would not attend, and yet, for the moment, he allowed himself a pause. He sat in his favorite chair, beside the window, looking out at the dimming skyline. In his lap rested the envelope of photographs he had chosen to keep. Not as evidence, but as testament. He opened it again, slowly, carefully. The image of Peter Farnler and Lily Caro smiling in the sunlight still held power, not just for what it revealed, but for what it refused to explain. There had been love there once, even if brief, connection. That photograph had not lied. It had told a part of the story, and that, Poirot knew, was the most dangerous kind of truth, the partial one. He placed it beside the next, Lily holding her child, her eyes weary, her face drawn, but her hands firm around the infant, a woman alone, determined to protect something, someone. She had not wanted to disappear. She had been erased. Then the staged photo, Lady Eugenia standing in the corridor, confused, dressed, but adrift. A pawn in a story not fully her own. Perhaps she had been cruel. Certainly she had made choices to preserve reputation over responsibility. But she had also been forced to bear the cost of silence for decades. When her world was reconstructed through deception, it had not been a distortion. It had been a mirror. Poirot closed the envelope and set it aside. He sat with his thoughts for a long time, allowing the quiet to stretch. No one disturbed him. No clocks ticked. The city could roar around him. But Hercule Poirot understood the value of stillness, the value of reflection. He thought of the legacy Adelaide had tried to claim, not money, not land, but acknowledgement. She had believed that if she could make Lady Eugenia relive her betrayal, if she could make the world see what had been denied, she would balance the scales. But justice, Poirot reflected, was never that simple. Justice was not revenge. Justice was not exposure. Justice was not the spotlight turned onto a shameful truth. It was something quieter, something steadier. It was the acceptance of what had happened without distortion, without performance, and the courage to live on despite it. He thought, too, of Oliver, the boy without a name, the heir raised in a borrowed identity. Would he return someday, emboldened by truth? Would he seek to reclaim what his mother believed was stolen? Or would he vanish into the wide world, carving out a life beyond inheritance? And legacy, Poirot did not know, and he was content not to. Not every thread had to be tied into a bow. He glanced at the clock. 8:10 then. With the same quiet precision that defined every action of his life, he rose, walked to the fireplace, and lit a small fire. It was not cold, but it was comforting. The ritual of warmth, of light. He sat again, and this time opened his notebook to the final page. He wrote, "Memory is not truth. It is not evidence. It is not even history. Memory is theatre improvised, rewritten, restaged in the mind again and again. But in the theatre of the mind, who plays the villain? Who plays the victim? And who decides which scene deserves applause? I have seen lies wrapped in sincerity and truths buried in guilt. I have seen families torn apart by what they could not say, and yet I still believe in the little grey cells, in order, in clarity, in justice not always served by courts, but by conscience. The photograph that should not exist existed because someone refused to forget, and in remembering, she destroyed herself. But she also revealed something real, painfully real, perhaps. That is the closest we come to justice in the end, not punishment, not revelation, but the simple, unbearable fact of being seen. He closed the notebook, placed it gently on the side table, and folded his hands. Outside, London moved on. 1,000 windows flickered, 1,000 lives unfolded in parallel. Somewhere, someone else was beginning their own story. Somewhere, a secret was being buried. Somewhere, a truth was being framed just so. But here, in Whitehaven Mansions, the case of the photograph that shouldn't exist was complete, and Hercule Poirot, once more, had returned order to chaos. With a final glance at the fire, he whispered into the quiet room, "La justice véritable, c'est la mémoire qui refuse diablia." True justice is the memory that refuses to forget. Several weeks later, a small envelope arrived at Whitehaven Mansions, unmarked but precise in its proportions. Inside, Hercule Poirot found a single item, a photograph. It was neither doctored nor disturbing. No timestamp, no threat, no lie. Just a picture of the Farnley Gardens in spring-soft sunlight falling across the stone path. The ivy creeping back along the eastern wall, and in the far distance, Clara Farnley seated on a bench, reading. There was no message, but there was a meaning. Poirot held the image for a long moment. Not for the photographic composition, it was unremarkable, but for what it signified. The story had ended not in confrontation, nor courtroom, but in continuity. Clara had chosen to remain at the manor, not as heir, not as a custodian of old shame, but as a witness to everything that had passed. She had not rewritten the will. She had not sold the estate. She simply stayed. Perhaps that was her justice. To live honestly where others had deceived. Poirot placed the photograph inside his desk, next to the others he had retained. He no longer needed them to solve anything. They were no longer clues, they were symbols, reminders of the case where reality and memory blurred until only motive remained. He sat down to write his final note on the matter, carefully, with the quiet rhythm of resolution. Farnley was not a house of murder, but of omission. It held too much silence, and into that silence crept invention, resentment, illusion. Adelaide Lilly used memory as her weapon, but it was truth, in the end, that undid her, not because it was louder, but because it did not need to shout. Every actor played their part. Eugenia, in her fear of disgrace; Clara, in her unwilling complicity; Oliver, in the quiet search for an identity never offered to him. Even the house itself played a role, offering just enough shadow for secrets to thrive. But secrets, like photographs, fade, and those who depend on them find themselves chasing ghosts. This case reminded me that memory is fragile, but guilt that, mon ami, endures with clarity. Poirot placed the pen down, satisfied. As he prepared to rise, he allowed himself one last moment of reflection. He thought not of the culprits, nor of their crimes, but of something Clara had said. As he was leaving Farnla, "There's no inheritance in the truth," she'd said. "But at least there's nothing left to hide." Poirot, at the time, had only nodded. But now, he whispered, "Indeed, mademoiselle, nothing left to hide, only something to live with." He stood, adjusted his cuffs, brushed a speck of dust from his sleeve, and with that, Hercule Poirot turned from the case of the photograph that should not have existed, satisfied that this time justice had taken the form of understanding.